After the news broke that Robert Pattinson had joined Dune 3, rumors immediately started swirling that the Batman sequel might be quietly cancelled. Those speculations only grew stronger after some vague statements from James Gunn, which many interpreted as subtle hints at a possible reworking of the whole DC Elseworlds concept. Word is, there's some disagreement within the leadership at Warner Brothers about whether a separate Elseworlds branch is even needed. Supposedly, there are ongoing internal discussions between Gunn and certain producers over whether it's worth continuing that line or if they should just focus entirely on the unified cinematic universe, but the situation is even messier than it seems. Despite Gunn acknowledging Elseworlds as a standalone label in public statements, he has never explicitly referred to Reeves' verse or Todd Phillips' Joker as part of that line. In one interview, he even said that nothing has been formally designated as an Elseworlds project, which only raises more questions. So at this point, it's hard to say what Elseworlds really even means. Everything about it feels very vague and undefined. That said, what is clear is that the Batman Part 2 is in a pretty unstable position right now. It doesn't look like the project is cancelled, but chances are we're looking at yet another delay. Warner's has already commented on the situation, saying that there are no cancellations, the project is still alive, but the filming timeline might shift again. If insiders are to be believed, this would mark the 5th delay the sequel has gone through so far. Interestingly, some sources claim that as of now, the studio still hasn't received a final version of the script from Matt Reeves. He's reportedly still working on it, even though this story has supposedly been in development for years already. It's worth remembering that Reeves took a long time writing the first part as well. In its early drafts, the plot was supposed to focus on the Riddler and Deathstroke, but eventually Deathstroke was dropped and the film was restructured into a grounded noir-style detective story, which is what made it so unique. What we'll see in the second installment is still very unclear. However, some unconfirmed rumors suggest the genre may shift a bit, leaning more into action and even fantasy elements. In other words, the Batman 2 might end up being more comic booky and less grounded than the original. That kind of shift could definitely worry fans of the first film, since its strength was very much in its gritty, author-driven approach to the Batman mythos. Still, the project remains alive, even if its status is shaky. Pattinson himself mentioned that filming was supposed to begin this summer, but as of now, there's no official confirmation, no locked script, no solid schedule, and no final word on whether the full creative team is even returning. Even Matt Reeves' name hasn't been officially attached to the production calendar yet. Add to all that the Dune 3 factor. Pattinson is rumored to have a significant role in the upcoming Villeneuve's movie. How major that role is, no one knows, and there's no clear timeline on when filming for Dune 3 will begin either. All of this contributes to a general feeling of uncertainty. Will Pattinson realistically be able to do both massive projects back to back? That said, this kind of scheduling overlap isn't uncommon. Look at Tom Holland. He's got Nolan's The Odyssey going on while still gearing up to return as Spider-Man in MCU, and since both Dune and the Batman are Warner Brothers properties, the studio could theoretically coordinate things to make both projects happen. It all comes down to how quickly Matt Reeves can finish the script, and when the studio finally gives the official green light to start production. For now, the situation remains cautiously optimistic. The Batman sequel hasn't been cancelled, but it's definitely being slowed down. Right now, we basically know nothing about the plot. There's still no finalized script, and the studio hasn't made any official cast announcements. Without a finished screenplay or confirmed details, it's impossible to say anything for sure. That said, we do have a few breadcrumbs, and while it's all still pure speculation based on hints dropped in interviews, fans and analysts have already started piecing together the most logical directions the sequel could take. The two most talked about and potentially fitting storylines are Hush and Heart of Ice. These theories didn't come out of nowhere. Matt Reeves himself once said he was intrigued by the idea of bringing Mr. Freeze into his dark, grounded version of Gotham. Now that could have just been him spitballing ideas as a fan of the character, but knowing how intentional Reeves tends to be with his words, it could also have been a subtle nod toward a villain he's seriously considering. And if Part 2 really is shifting slightly in tone towards something more fantastical, then Freeze could be a perfect fit for that kind of evolution. Still, out of all the theories floating around, Hush definitely feels like the most natural continuation of the story. That arc was already partially teased in the first movie. There are several moments in the Batman that feel like they're setting the stage for the arrival of Tommy Elliot, a brilliant surgeon and former childhood friend of Bruce, who eventually becomes the vengeful villain known as Hush. If the first part was all about uncovering the dark truths behind the Wayne family legacy, then Hush would deepen that personal and psychological conflict even more. It's a story that could take Bruce to some truly emotional places. There were even rumors floating around that Dan Stevens was being eyed to play Hush. That's never been confirmed, of course. Could have been pure fan casting, or maybe even a real early casting decision the studio just hasn't announced yet. Either way, it shows how much anticipation there is around this arc. On the flip side, Heart of Ice would allow Reeves to introduce Mr. Freeze, a tragic villain with a deeply emotional motivation. That could elevate the sequel's dramatic weight, especially if it can be blended with the tone set by the first film. If done right, Freeze's story could be incredibly powerful, but again, all we have so far are conceptual conversations Reeves may or may not have had behind the scenes. Until we get a synopsis, casting announcements, or any real story details, it's all just educated guesswork. But if Reeves really is building the sequel on the emotional and thematic foundation of the first movie, then Hush feels like the clear frontrunner among all possible storylines. We can't forget that the ending of The Batman left a pretty important teaser for what might come next. In one of the final scenes set in Arkham, we catch a glimpse of the Joker. His line that Gotham loves a comeback story was a clear nod to the fact that he's not done yet. It felt like a subtle signal that Joker will eventually have his moment. Barry Keoghan himself has been very open about wanting to return, not just for another cameo, but as a full-blown main villain. He's clearly passionate about diving deeper into this role and really exploring the character in the gritty world Reeves has built. Still, despite all the enthusiasm, there's no official word yet on whether he's actually going to appear in the sequel. Same goes for who the main villain will be. Out of all the fan theories and potential storylines, Hush still seems like the strongest contender. As for the Joker, it doesn't seem like Reeves is in any rush to make him the central villain just yet. Maybe he's saving that for part 3, if it ever gets made. Despite all the positive signals, the situation around the sequel still feels pretty unstable. These cancellation rumors aren't coming out of nowhere. It's obvious there are behind-the-scenes discussions happening at Warner Studios, creative debates, maybe even some internal conflicts when it comes to making key decisions. James Gunn is currently building his own DCU, which will include its own version of Batman, one that's more comic accurate, more interconnected with the larger narrative. Meanwhile, Reeves's version exists outside of that continuity, which creates a certain level of confusion. The whole Elseworlds label hasn't been clearly defined. That's led many to believe that the studio's attitude toward these standalone stories could change at any moment. From a marketing and audience perspective, having 2 parallel Batmen is a risky move. For the average moviegoer, it can be confusing, and considering Batman is arguably the crown jewel of the DC brand, Warner's might not want to risk muddying the waters with dual interpretations. There's also the box office numbers to think about. The Batman made around $770 million globally. It's a strong result, but not an explosive one. It wasn't a breakout hit on the level of the first Aquaman or Joker. It turned a profit, and it was praised by critics, but from a studio perspective, it might not have been quite successful enough to greenlight a bigger budget sequel without hesitation. Compare that to Joker, which blew past expectations and gave Todd Phillips full creative freedom on a sequel with bold stylistic choices, musical elements, and the return of Joaquin Phoenix. The Batman hasn't yet earned that level of trust. Warner seems to be approaching this one more cautiously. They want more control, especially while they're reshaping the entire DC landscape. As of now, the official release date for The Batman 2 is still listed as October 1st, 2027. That date is still on the studio's production calendar, but let's be real, everyone knows it could easily get pushed back again. The script isn't finished, the start of filming hasn't been confirmed, Pattinson is tied up with Dune Part 3, and Matt Reeves hasn't shared any major updates in a long time. The general feeling is that a second Batman is still going to happen, but it might end up being more of a conclusion than a new chapter in a full trilogy. It's possible Warners will let Reeves finish his vision with one more movie, and then shift all focus to Gunverse. There's even another option on the table. If Reeves takes too long finalizing the script, producers might keep him on as a creative consultant and bring in someone else to write and direct. Someone faster, more production ready. Whatever the outcome, one thing's clear. The Batman Part 2 is currently walking a tightrope between cautious optimism and a total overhaul of plans.